Hey, church, how are you doing today? I hope this finds you well. It's definitely getting towards summer. Things are heating up. And hey, I wanted just to give a shout out to the boys, Eric and Ryan. Man, they're crushing this new series, The Story Behind the Story. And Eric was, again, exceptional yesterday. So I hope you're tracking with that and following that. So here we are in Colossians. We're going to pick it up in chapter 2, beginning in verse 16. It says this: "Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to religious festivals, new moon celebrations, or Sabbath days. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ." There's that phrase again, in Christ. "Do not let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you. Such a person also goes into great detail about what they have seen. They are puffed up with idle notions by their unspiritual mind. They have lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows as God causes it to grow." So ultimately, the final line is God is the head of all things. I want to share a quote with you that comes from John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church. He said this some 400 years ago about this concept of what I would think we're living, these cultural phenomenon we're living in today. He says, "I'm not afraid that the people called Methodists should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or America, but I am afraid lest that they should only exist as a dead sect from the form of religion without the power, and thus undoubtedly will be the case unless they hold fast both the doctrine, spirit, and discipline with which they first set out." So part of what Wesley is trying to say is that it's form without power, it's ritual without reality, it's motions without the movement, right? And these kind of things signify the kiss of death for the work of God in the community of people. One of the things that I have said recently to some pastors is, I think the healthy Orthodox church is fighting a two-front battle. It's fighting about a battle against culture that is trying to dictate the standards and the norms for which the church has to live in. At the same time, it's fighting another front, another battle with the North American cultural church that also has a variation of the gospel that's not true. So not only are we having to fend off the culture's desire to dictate to us what it does, we're having to fend off our Christian brothers and sisters who have been misguided by a progressive and pluralistic gospel. This is part of what Wesley was talking about. Here's what I think happens in this passage. He says, don't let anybody come around and judge you. So what is happening essentially is the first church of the self-righteous down the street has apparently showed up at the Colossian community church and began to tell the Colossians what they're doing wrong. Essentially telling them, listen, you got this ritual. What they did is they come down, they look at the bulletin and discover, hey, you're doing things different than we are. This is the comparison trap that all churches should avoid. Right, I'm just going to tell you right now, we don't do things exactly at Georgianna, exactly like my brother Titus does at First Baptist. But on all things Jesus, we are equal. And all things Jesus, we're in it together. But the actual methodology just looks a little different from his place to our place. So one of the things that I would say to us is that motions get passed on when we begin to minimize methodologies and we begin to minimize the meanings of why we do things. It's a form of religion without the power. So here's the difference that I'm talking about. Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. Did you catch that? Here's what I'm trying to say. Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. Before long, powerful movements become meaningless motions. You see it everywhere in the North American church. All right, so let me quickly get to this last portion here. Paul is essentially saying, listen, you need to beware. You need to be on your guard against ultra superior religious people that are like super Christians, people that tout themselves as being holier than thou or having more spiritual knowledge than the other person. And if these people are just walking among us, he says you should beware of them because what's underneath that is judgmentalism, self-righteousness, just this whole concept of wanting to put people down and make sure that they're in their place. He says, listen, everything's driven by humility. So what he's telling the church at Colossae is there's some folks walking around amongst you who thinks they're better than everybody else. He says, beware of them. He says, because it's a false sense of spirituality that is really unspiritual, he says. Here's an example, and I'll just share this as I close. I knew somebody years ago in our church who everybody in our church would have said, oh, they're probably the top 10 most spiritual people in our church. Except their kids used to talk about them. They used to rat them out. The kids would talk about the behavior of this person and what they did. And essentially what the kids would say about this person is that they were a fraud, that they weren't real, that they were faking it, right? So Paul is saying, hey, you have to be wary of the fact that there are people out among you, walking around you, that you are emulating, that are doing nothing more than faking it. You want to get to know people's faith, their heart, right? So a lot going on in this passage. You've got to avoid the comparison trap that we do with each other and with other churches. And we have to see ourselves for who we are called to be in Christ, right? So again, a lot going on there. I hope this is helpful in terms of helping us understand what Paul is trying to tell us about what it means to be the church. So church, I love you. I hope you know that, and I can't wait to be with you again next week. Have a great day.